Hi everyone, it's Anna Meyer here again, and this time we're going to look at World Machine, the setup that I use for my large overland maps, the latest version of it. This is kind of version 6, and this one is tuned to, or kind of, set to render terrain at 30 meters per pixel. It's when you use terrain software like World Machine and TerraGen and others, you you kind of tend you want to the end result is usually works best at a set resolution, meaning you tune your fractals and all the settings and stuff to get the result at a certain resolution. If you increase it or decrease it, you get into trouble and things look different and so on. So this one I've actually tried to match it to look good at 30 meters per pixel, and it seems to be roughly in the sweet spot of where World Machine can perform the best. If you have a larger resolution, you you kind of tend to it takes a lot more burden to get to just get a little bit better result. And lower resolution, you don't really use enough of the features that and the terrain doesn't look that good. But this is always more of an art form than a science, so it's a continuous work and struggle to make it better. So, but here is the setup I'm working on, and this is the file that you will be able to download. So all of you pledged on the $5 level can download the file as well, and it is my production file. It's the one I'm working with right now. The only thing is I've taken away all the content that is proprietary for the client I'm working for right now. So I've taken away that particular terrain, but all the fractals are in there and stuff. And I've also taken away the texture and the export. It not because it's proprietary or anything, it's just that it's so messy, so I don't want to show anyone else because it's kind of, they are very much a work in progress. This bit here is kind of cleaned up, which it looks like a joke when you see the mess and tangles of wires and stuff here, but there is some order to the mess here. So let's go over and I'll show you a little bit of how the file is structured. And those of you who had looked before and seen my earlier videos, they recognize this because I try to be consistent, at least for my own way, so I know what to find, where to find things. And I've started more and more to centralize all the controllers, and I've chosen a purple simply because it's not a natural color. So here I have all the controllers that generate terrain or regulate where the terrain is supposed to be and all the other features are supposed to be. And I work with several layers of terrain generating devices. First is the base terrain, and that's you can basically say is lowland, or the base terrain, and you have different that varies over large areas. These aren't perfected by any means, but the I've seen that the technology works. So you set a base terrain, and it's a mixture of fractals and blur and rent and erosion and stuff that can create a very varied terrain over a large area. And then you can blend and mix the base terrains if you want to. So that builds the foundation of the terrain. And then I have terrain effects, and these are only two that I've figured out so far that I will put under the terrain effects, and that's distortion. I'll show more later about that, and also coastal erosion mask, because most terrains here have a built-in coastal erosion, and for some reason sometimes you want the coastline to be jagged and you want these kind of majestic mountains to stick straight out into the water and not be eroded away, and therefore you can mask the coastal erosion across all the different terrains and highlands and stuff. You can simply put in masking. This area should not be, the coast should not be eroded away. And then we have the highlands, and so far I've put in 6 different highlands, and that different types of hills and mountains. The base terrain contains a little bit of hills and variations, but these are things that you put in major hills and big mountain chains and stuff. You can vary these, and they will buff up the terrain according to whatever algorithms or fractals you are set to be in here. And then we have the terrain features. And terrain features are things you want to add on afterwards or tweak it. And in this case, the first one is canyons. I simply cut a hole, or if you use a line, it becomes like a canyon. You can cut out craters, canyons, and stuff like that, and holes for lakes and things too. And the second features, it's only in the test phase so far, but that one is kind of rockiness. You can put in things. Features can be, it can be boulders, it can be spikes in the terrain, can be all sorts of stuff like that that you just want to have, and you want to regulate afterwards in a certain area. You want to have it. The third feature here that I have right now is blur. So I just smooth out a terrain. So if you for some reason want a flat plane somewhere, you can just take this and put the feature 3 and it will just blur and smooth out the terrain. And you can put in more of each of these, this kind of a plug-in structure here. So if you have the base terrains are here, so we have the 3 base terrains here, and you can simply extend this and plug in 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever you want, after as many more as you like. And the same things here are the highlands. They're a little bit more complicated. So each of them here, they are grouped. So you have the first one here in this group, the second one here, and the third one, the fourth, fifth, and the sixth one. The reason that the highlands are complicated is that these here integrates lakes and rivers, go in and obscure the data, so to speak, and make the data flow much more complicated. That's why there's so many devices here. So I will go in later and explain how each of these works. Not in this video, but in future videos. This is the overview and how you use this file. And then you have the terrain effect of features. Sorry, the features are here. And here we have rockiness, canyons, and blurred. And I have the pipes here for a fourth one that I haven't set race, but I kind of took it away because it didn't work that well, so I kind of skipped it. But they're openings for other features. And when I said the ones here that are terrain effects, distortion, and coastal erosion, they are simply piped in here. So there's a coastal erosion device on most of the base terrains, and all of the highlands here have. So the masking of that device is piped into each of these. That's why it gets complicated. The same thing with distortion. Distortion is plugged into many of these, not all of them, but most of them have support for distortion as well. And then the next set of devices that we're going to look at in this video is the rivers, lakes, and fill lakes. And that's the way to add it. And rivers and lakes, I should talk a little bit about them, because that's something that, in my opinion, should be obvious that should be in terrain generating programs. But so far, I haven't seen anything properly done yet. World Machine has a very primitive river device put in, but in my opinion, it doesn't create, and it's still only in beta, and it doesn't create anything near as good as you would expect rivers to be. So I have basically have to program it myself and set it up, and it's far from good, but at least it can generate fairly good results in not too much trouble and effort. So as you will see later on, nothing is easy when it comes to doing 3D terrain, but you can actually create lakes, rivers, and fill lakes. And there are 3 different ones, and I will go into that later in this video when we actually look at them in the terrain. So that's the controllers in this purple device. And here we have an orange brown area over here, and that's where we have the different views. And for this tutorial, we're only going to use the elevation view, and that's the one you see over here. It's simply color coded according to elevation. And I also have there is support for a guide elevation view and a guide map view. And you can, if often when you work with terrains, you have already have a sketch, or you have a previous map or something that you want to match and that terrain should look like. And there you can import that JPEG or TIFF, not JPEG in this version, it has to be TIFF or PNG, and you can import them using the file input device, and then you can get the file here, and then you can set the size and you interpret it as RGB. And then when you use that, you can mix that with the elevation texture, or you can use it straight. And that way, when you can see the guide map overlaid, and that's very effective to match. So you get your terrain to actually match a previous map that you want to work from, or work towards, I guess is better to say. So that's the overview of the functions in this. There is a big gray, kind of gray-green sphere here, and that's texture. And that is in my production file. This is full of pipes and stuff for all sorts of crap. But I took that out here because it's not ready to be shown or used yet. So I simplified it. So it's only the elevation texturing that is here. And there's a lot of pipes for other types of masks and data coming from the terrain here that can be used for texture. But in this case, we're only going to look at the actual terrain building and not the texturing. Okay, so that was the first overview what this file is about, and it's the intention with this is to create large area terrain, thousands of square miles if need be. So time to take a step further and look into the extents. And extents are the areas that we work with, or render rather. But so if you want to look at it, and I have in this file I have a whole bunch of different extents, and these are the white squares here that are the extents. And each extent, if I zoom in a bit here, they are called 1K, 2K, 4K, and 8K. And if I zoom out here, down here is a huge one that is called 16K. And each of these are preset, so they will have the resolution. If you rendered this to 1024 by 1024, each pixel will represent 30 meters, or about 100 feet. And this one is twice the resolution, so it's 248 by 248 pixels, and it's also 4 times the size, so it's still 30 meters. So if you look at the one, if I go in here and select on the project settings, I can select the 1K here, and we look at the 1K. It takes a little bit for World Machine to update it here, but we have the 1K extent is 30.72 kilometers, and at 1024 that's 30 meters per pixel. So here you can simply choose between what area you want to use and what resolution. And the small ones here, like the 1 and 2, are suitable. Maybe even the 4 are suitable while you're working. But the big ones here, the 8 and the 16K, are only for the final render, because to render 16K can take hours. And to render the 8K can take an hour at least, or maybe several hours. But the 16K can take many hours, and you might need to go into tiling, but that's something for a future video. So apart from these that have the fixed size here, I have one here that is called variable, and sometimes I've called it working, and that's the one that I want to just fiddle around with while I'm looking at things in low resolution and working with them. I usually work using the variable extent. So I go in here and I choose the variable extent here. Select it, and you see this one, I render it at low resolution. I can simply put the resolution up and down, and this value here will vary a bit up and down, meaning don't rely on it for the final result, but it's great when you want to see where a river is supposed to go and highlands, and when you create the terrain. That way you can simply drag this one and make it smaller and larger and smaller. The other ones here, you should make sure that you don't change the size of them. I wish there were a way in a function in World Machine where you can set the size and lock that and still be able to move them around, but you can either change everything or nothing. So that's one of the things that needs to, I think, should be updated in future versions of World Machine. But the variable extent is what I use when I move things around, and I can zoom in and out in the terrain. And that way I can when I manipulate it, and I can render it fairly quickly. So if you look at it here, I have a 1000 by 1000. It should go in 45 seconds or something like that. So that's the extent. If some of you noticed that there was another extent, I've only talked about 6 extents, and there is a 7th one. And when this is rendered, I want to talk about that one a little bit too, because that's a special one that is not used to create any end results, but it is great. It has another very, very important function. So let's see if this one comes. Remember I talked about guide maps, and guide maps are that thing that you can use. You import a large and then you spread it out over a large area and use it as a reference way, so you put things in exactly the right spot. And sometimes, yeah, World Machine can take a little bit of a... I thought that 1000 should take about 45 seconds, but we're up to about 50 seconds. So I'm going to pause this one here and be back when it's done. Okay, now it's ready. So now I take this, and here you have the little group of islands that I created, and you can, well, we already seen them in full resolution. So let's go back to the layout mode, and I talked about the guide map extent, and this one is special. So the other ones were 100 or something. This one is 2,334.72 kilometers. That happened to be the last guide map I used, had that size. And if you go out here, you see this is the guide map extent, and it is huge. And there's two clear good uses for an extent that is way bigger than you will render. Well, one is that you can use it to render a very low resolution of the whole thing. That's great. It's also good to use to place things, meaning you can place, if you want to render exactly the same as the guide map in a tiled setup, you can actually create an output that match the guide map perfectly. And you can also use this extent to place the guide map. So you place the extent first, and then you put the guide map in there, and you make sure that things match, because you can use extents as a guide for imports, for outputs and stuff like that. So you can actually match the extent, and that's a really good function to get things to match. Like you can have textures, you can have, maybe you have a mask, a file that you with the coastlines from a guide map, and then you can actually put that in and let that drive where the base terrain should be, for example. And so there are many different ideas or instances when it can be really useful to have a huge extent. And one other is that normally you can't zoom out further than 256 kilometers. But if you have a guide map that is huge, you can zoom to extents. And that's a really cool function. And now all of a sudden we can zoom out way further out than these scales going to 256 kilometers. So there's a sneaky way of getting around it if you have a large extent like this. And here you can see the other extents. And that little thing that was 60 kilometers now looks nothing. So World Machine can work with enormous terrains if you want to. The problem is that as soon as things, if you start covering these 2000 by 2000 kilometers with actual terrain, World Machine have a tendency of being very sluggish. There is a way of workaround, and that's by reducing the quality of the preview. That speeds it up significantly. The problem is that then you need to build every time you do a change, otherwise you don't see the results. So it is a balancing act whether you want to be able to see before you build, or whether you want to be able to do something and it takes 30 or 40 seconds, maybe even a minute before, when you put something in, like a new set of hills, and you have to wait a minute before you even can see something. That get very tedious, especially when you edit rivers, put in highlands and stuff. And it's always a balancing act, and depending on your machine, if you're running from an SSD drive, etc., you simply have to tweak, and depending on the amount of erosion you use, and a whole set of other factors, you simply have to tweak the preview quality. And I did a previous video when I had the settings and stuff in World Machine, where you can actually, how you go in and tweak that. But now here we looked at the extents, and we can set, and these can be moved around independently, and you make sure that you go into the overview here, and you have the center tab. If you have the view tab here, you only see the extent that is selected. All the other extents are gone, which is perfect for decluttering, and also make sure you don't move them about by mistake, because some extents you want them to have the perfect spot, and that's when, if they have a specific spot, then you go in here and lock it. I've done that with the guide map, but not with the other extents. And one of the problem there is when you have many extents like this, sometimes if you lock an extent, for some reason other extents can be under it, and that means that you can't reach any of the others. That's another weird kind of bug in World Machine that they should look into. So we'll see if they fix that one. It seems to be kind of random if that happens or not. So there must be some sort of internal order in World Machine that is not really seeing here, because variable is at the bottom of the list, and for some reason it works even if guide map is locked. But if that happens, then you have to unlock that one and move it on the side and then lock it again and see if it works. Okay, that was extents.